All right, so we are now on to the last item in CRUD, which is how do you delete data from your persistent container using core data? So let's try that out over here as well. So what if instead of checking items off by just having the accessory show up, what if instead we just remove the item from our persistent container? So I'm going to comment out this line, which is of course toggling the done attribute from true to false. And instead, I'm going to tap into that item array and I'm going to use the method remove at a particular index. And the index is, of course, index path.row, which is the current selected index. Now, remember, this line does nothing for our core data. It merely updates our item array, which is used to populate our table view so that when we reload the table view, we're able to refresh the latest items. Now, the method that we'll need to remove the data from our context is context.delete, and we can specify an NSManage object to delete. And that is, of course, going to be item array at indexPath.row. So the NSManage object at the current selected row here. Now, just saying delete to our context is not enough, remember. This is the temporary area. And unless we save that context and we commit those changes to our persistent container, then this line would have done nothing at all. So now we're going to save that context using that same save items method. And that's going to take the current state of the context and it's going to try and commit it to our persistent container. And at the end of all of that, it's going to reload the table view and show us the latest data. Now, the order at which you call these two methods, one is removing the current item from the item array, which is used to load up the table view data source. And the other one is removing the data from our permanent stores. The order matters a huge deal. And if we run our app, we'll see what happens when we don't take care of that. If we run our app as it is right now, and we click on the last item in our table view, so remember that our item array at the moment only contains 3 NSManage objects, and they're at index 0, 1, and 2. Now, when I click on the third row here, or index equals 2, the first thing that's going to trigger is that I'm going to remove that item from our item array. So now I only have 2 items in our item array. And if I click here, then our app is going to crash because indexPath.row at the moment equals 2. And once we remove the item at index 2, and then we try to access it to try and delete it from our context, then this is why we have an index out of range error. And if we try to run the app without clicking on the last item, if we try to click maybe the first item, then you can see that our app also behaves rather strangely, and it removes the second to last item. And this is all because of the order of our methods. So what we have to do is we have to call context.delete first to remove this NSManage object from our context before we try to remove it from our item array, because we're using the item array here to try and grab that object. So now if we run our app with this new order, then you can see that when we try to delete something, our app works as expected. So all of these work exactly as we want it to. So I think deleting our items outright when we click on it is a little bit dramatic. And to be honest, I think I prefer the user experience where we have a check mark next to the ones that are done. So I'm going to comment out these 2 lines. But before we end this lesson, it's a good point to remind ourselves that to delete items from our context, all we need to do is just call context.delete and then specify the item that we want removed. But that's not enough. As with everything using core data and trying to do CRUD on it, we have to also save the context and commit the current status to our persistent containers. So other than read, everything else, create, update, or destroy, basically whenever you need to change the data inside the persistent store, you always need to call context.save to commit those changes. Now, when you're reading, or as we've done inside load items, we don't call save items or context.save here because we don't need to change the persistent container. And instead, we're just fetching it and looking at the current version. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to see some more fancy stuff that we can do using core data. And I'm going to show you how you can query items using core data so that we can create a search bar inside our to-do list app. So that if we have a whole bunch of to-dos, like 20, we can search and look for the ones that we're interested in. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.